the Honorable Mr. Justice B. Rajendran, Shri Gurumurthy, an economic scholar and the special guest, the Honorable Judge, friends, brothers and sisters. I am extremely happy to welcome you all to this evening function. As you all know, as a part of our 150th year celebrations, we have been arranging a series of lectures on different subjects, inviting scholars and VVIPs to deliver the lecture so that we share their views. As you all know, I don't propose to go into the details of economy as the special guest will speak on that subject. Economy always defies logic. The individual attitudes, impulses and emotions determine the market as well as the economy. For an illustration, I would say, I buy flower, jasmine flower, from a lady florist for 20 rupees per yard for puja. When I buy the same flower for my first night, I am in a liberal mood to lose to a lady. Instead of 20, I pay 30. With the result, even before losing to another lady, hours later, I lose to this florist lady 50% higher. This determines the market, this determines the economy. My mood ultimately decides what is the market and what is the economy of a country. Individuals, as I said, they shape the course of economy. Let me share a practice by one of the topmost industrialists in the country. He is in every business. He is in manufacturing watches. He is in road transport. He operates aircrafts. He is in software. Well, he is everywhere. He has a practice. His food is very frugal. All that he takes for supper is 3 dry wheat roti and some vegetable salad. Put together it should cost some 30 rupees, in any case not more than that. But it costs him at least 10 days in a month, 25,000 rupees. It's unbelievable yet true. This gentleman in a month, 10 to 12 days, moves out of his hometown. His cook travels along with him in the economy class. When he goes in the executive class, his own chosen cook travels in the same flight in the economy class. This industrialist has got a chain of star hotels across India, almost in all big cities. He stays with him in another room. That cook goes to the hotel kitchen, prepares 3 dry wheat rotis and little salad. Once the business is over, the industrialist comes back. He comes back, the cook also comes back with him in the flight. This, maybe you can say it's the taste or the trust or whatever it is. This 3 wheat rotis costing 25,000 rupees is an individual attitude that decides and determines the economy. Probably it is everywhere, not only something special to India. With this, may I request the Honorable Mr. Justice B. Rajendran to address us. I would request Mr. Krishnan to present the shawl to him. May I request Mr. M.S. Subramaniam to present the shawl to the learned judge.
Good evening to all of you. My dear brother, Honorable Justice Ram Subramaniam, President of the Madras Bar Association, Secretary of the Bar Association, the guest speaker, special guest of today evening, Mr. Gurumurthy, Senior Counsel, members of the Bar Association, and others present here. First of all, let me thank you, the President and the members, for having invited me today, because I have come here to hear a person of versatile personality. We have heard him on many occasions. We have seen his writing in very many papers. Though some of you had occasions to meet him, I had a rare occasion of meeting in 2 occasions only. But every time I met him, I found here is a gentleman who takes everything in the right spirit. He makes a point which is appealing and appalling. He does in such a way, he drives the point to the utmost end. Such as a nice man, a versatile personality, and who has been invited by the Madras Bar under the 150th year celebration, where we have every time a special lecture. The choice of the topic and the choice of the person makes it very important, and that has been done by the Bar Association. I've been given the pleasant task of introducing this gentleman to this audience. I asked a question to the President. Mr. President, he is very well known to everyone, but he's answered in a very nice way. Sir, he is known everywhere, but some nuances the people may not know. That's what I wanted you to say, sir. Therefore, I contacted a very good friend of him, and who happened to be my friend also. He said, "Oh, you don't know Mr. Gurumurthy?" I said, "I know Mr. Gurumurthy very well, sir, but I would like to know something more about him." Well, came the reply. Here is one gentleman who has the one capacity to make people come to his way. I'll cite a small example. There was a litigation. He is a chartered accountant by profession. He deals in economy. He deals in family subjects. He deals in any other matters. But here is a person, because he is coming to your court, I'll say one thing is, he is a mediator. He is an arbitrator. He is a person who can deal with people, and we deal with cases. I was astonished. Sir, you mean to say that he has argued a case in the court? You will be flabbergasted. He has instructed very many senior counsels in Supreme Court and various other high courts. In fact, today, right now also I got another information. In a drafting of a plaint, in respect of a prayer, he has modified that prayer into such an extent, ultimately when it went up to the Supreme Court, that particular change which he had made stood up to the scrutiny of the Supreme Court. Think where a person of a chartered accountant, thank God, he has not come to this profession. In fact, he was an arbitrator, he made an arbitrator himself in the Bajaj Auto versus TVS case. Both of them are chosen. Here is a person who can take the responsibility of dealing with an international dispute also, which is also the part of it, can be done by him. There he acted as an arbitrator. Then he was a mediator in the famous L&T and Aditya. But another thing came to my knowledge. Very few people in India were eagerly awaited immediately after the Indian budget is declared. You all know very well, on very many occasions, the budget speech are made. The moment the budget is released, within hours, within inverted commas, within hours, a person discusses this in a very wonderful way, entire budget. The time granted to him after the budget release and the meeting is 1 hour. See the nuances which he takes into account, and that is weighted by so many economists and other chartered accountants for him to address. That is the second capacity he has got. Then, when such is a person, he is also an advisor, not to ordinary person. A person of eminent, I would call it as a responsibility, Indian Express late Mr. B.D. Goenka. He himself is a firebrand. He is authority by himself. If he wants an advice, one person he has asked is Gurumurthy. He is the one person whom he had also taken advice. He was an advisor to him. Last but not the least, if such is the case, these people also should be there in some other jovial manner, I could say, in the paper, in a different location. Though he is not into politics, he has made a vow that I will not enter into politics. Therefore, he keeps out of politics. So far, so good. But his name emanated just before these elections, contributing that he is going to be a candidate in a particular constituency because a namesake was declared to be the name. First came the phone calls. You are appointed as a person. You are going to be the MP. Sorry, sir, I am not going to be the MP. I am not the candidate. Then people did not agree. The next day, there were more phone calls. Why? Because that nomination was rejected. What, Mr. Gurumurthy? Your nomination is rejected? Or you can't even file a good nomination paper? Pat came, poor man. He has to also again say, I am not the person, neither I filed any application which is to be rejected. So, Indian Express carried one article ultimately saying that particular word used, in fact, that has really said, one name, two persons, too many queries. What a wonderful thing. Same Gurumurthy was the person. One name, two persons, too many queries. All this he has to answer and say, Naan avanillai. He has to say that. So this is the versatile personality. And so we are assembled here and this 150th year of the celebration. So on your behalf and on our behalf, really, I thank him for coming to this and giving this speech. Thank you. With this, I close my speech.
Justice Mr. Rajendran, the chief guest of this occasion, who made me feel very shy and embarrassed. Because whenever you try to introduce another, especially whom you have invited, you tend to be so generous that it is difficult for the person listening to sit. So I felt very embarrassed because we always ultimately go by what is the publicly available information about a person, which is always exaggerated. Anyhow, I am humbled. Then my friend Mr. Justice Ramasubramaniam, who has kindly graced the occasion to make me feel proud, and Mr. Tamilmani, the president of this Madras Bar Association, Mr. Kamalanathan, who invited me and insisted that I should deliver this speech, though I am not very sure as to how lawyers will be impressed with the presentation on economics. It's a good subject, but a difficult subject. And the way I have studied economics is different from the way generally the economists are known to have studied. But I suppose this 150th year lecture series, the organizers thought of inviting me, makes me feel happy because this is an institution of intellectuals. And you know, whenever you talk to people who are qualified, and some of them are more qualified, some of them are more capable, then you always feel proud because the audience makes the speaker's performance. The better the audience, the better becomes the speaker. So it is with this preface, I would like to share my thinking on Indian economy. You know, generally economics is supposed to be a universal subject. In fact, all economists used to say that economic laws are universal. And it applies whether somebody is in America, somebody is in India, somebody is in Uganda. This is supposed to be the universality of economics. And it is repeated in all economic schools, universities, colleges, textbooks. But you will be amazed to know that is not the truth. And that it is not the truth was considered after nearly 50, 60 years of trying to sustain that falsehood. Particularly when the world was caught between the warring ideological positions taken by the free market school and the Marxist school. Everybody thought these were two not only ideologically warring groups, but they also figure in an economic war. But not many know that both these ideologies had one thing in common. They looked at a person only as an economic creature. And both of them rejected the concept of God, culture, civilization, society, and ultimately, you may be surprised to know, even family. If there is an institution that is family, if there is some society, if there is some community, if there is some collectivity with a character, the present economic theories will not apply to such a society, such a family, such a setup. This is what I am going to tell you. And I am not going to be very abstract, I will be very concrete. You know, now I will take you to where we were in 1991-92 when the idea of globalization, liberalization came as a tsunami and virtually swept off many countries. In fact, at that time, because I was very closely associated with many top industrial groups in India, I spent hours and hours with them discussing about what do they think would be the consequence of this liberalization and globalization phenomenon, which has struck quite suddenly. It is not that you opted to liberalize your economy or you opted to globalize your economic policies, you were forced to do it. And it is not only India. Every country which had a socialist economic architecture was forced to drop it and defect to market capitalism. There was a wholesale defection. And what would be the consequence of it? No one knew. And I must have spent nearly several hundred hours talking to top industrial groups in India. At that time, those who were framing the policies of the government of India, I won't mention names, but I will indicate who they were. A person who was the deputy chairman of the planning commission till about 5-6 months ago used to be the economic advisor to the government of India, and he used to call the Indian industrialists and tell them, it is better for you to sell your industries to foreigners and become traders because India has been a trading nation for 300 years. We cannot manufacture. It is better to allow the foreigners to manufacture and let us set up shops. This was the discourse at the official level. If you don't sell it today, you will sell it as a scrap after some time. You can understand the extent of loss of confidence of the Indian industry. And at that time, a great economist by name Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati was invited to India by Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was the finance minister. And I must tell you something about Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati. Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati is from India. He was the younger brother of Justice Bhagwati, one of the finest economists, as Justice Bhagwati was supposed to be one of the finest legal brains to have sat on the bench. And Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati was acclaimed as the god of free trade in America. A Princeton University professor, he didn't get Nobel Prize, but his disciple, Paul Krugman, got the Nobel Prize. And Krugman said that my knowledge in this subject I owe to Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati. So impliedly, Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati virtually got the Nobel Prize in terms of the acknowledgement by his own disciple. So Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati framed the entire WTO, World Trade Organization, what was called the Dunkel Treaty. It was drafted by Arthur Dunkel, which became the basis for the World Trade Organization. And the entire structure was created by Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati, one of the most influential economists at that time, and even now he continues to wield considerable influence in the Western economic system and think tanks. So he came to India, and Dr. Manmohan Singh asked him, this was in the year 1993, what I am going to tell you is very, very critical for all of us to understand what is economics. Dr. Manmohan Singh asked him, we are in an economic mess. Please tell us, how can we come out of it? Dr. Jagdish Bhagwati gave a 72-page essay. One thing common about lawyers and economists is that both of them write very long documents. So, I will tell you about the personal problem I had when I had to become a journalist, because I had to cut these long drafts and to make short articles for which I had to work for days and days. How to cut my sentences and how to cut my paragraphs and how to cut my pages. That's a different thing. So he gave a 72-page paper in which 3 pages he dealt with about the Indian families and Indian women. How did he come to Indian families and Indian women? He said, if you look at India's savings, India saves about 22 to 23% of our GDP. That means almost a quarter of our GDP we save. Out of that, almost 88% is family savings. That is 19.5% out of this is family savings. He said, so long as your family saves so much, your economy cannot develop. You must make the families cut down their savings from 19 to 20% to about 9 to 10%. And the savings should become spending, because when you save less, you spend more. Or when you spend more, you save less. And the spending will transform into sales, and sales will transform into production. Production will transform into employment. And once you create this cycle, then there will be no problem. India will be a giant in the next 15 to 20 years, provided you ask your people to spend. Something new. But this is America. I am going to tell you later how this came about, how this thought came. And he said, this is not going to happen very easily, because this is beyond the power of economics to make the people spend, and particularly the women of India. They are not going to spend. So you must ensure that they are attracted to spend by goods imported from abroad, jewelry, cosmetics, textiles. You must get such goods and keep it in malls, so that they are very responsible people. They have responsibility to children, they have responsibility to parents, they have responsibility to elders, they have responsibility to husband. And so long as they are weighed down by this responsibility, they will not spend. And unless you attract them to give up these responsibilities, undermine these responsibilities, they will not spend. And so you have to devise policies by which you cut down the tariffs, make the goods cheap, allow foreign goods to come to India, it might flood the market. And once you begin spending, and spending becomes a habit, and it becomes part of your personal life and becomes national consumption, you cannot develop otherwise. The government of India began implementing these policies. And then one question came. You see, our investment to GDP ratio is 24%. Our savings is 22 to 23%. We import about 1% capital from outside. In economics, it is said, if you invest 4 rupees, the GDP grows by 1. Capital output ratio. So if you invest 24%, then you will get 6% growth rate. And you have to improve it to 32%, then you will get 8% growth rate. So unless you ramp up the investment, your GDP will not grow proportionately. And India, in the last 30-35 years, this capital output ratio has worked around 4%. Except recently there has been a problem. But otherwise this 4:1 of capital output ratio has worked. And he was asked, if we spend our money, where will we get money for investment? He said, don't worry, foreign investment will take care. This was the simple thesis that Dr. Jagdish Bhagavati wrote to the government of India, and it was on the website of the government of India till about 2 years ago. After somebody has removed it, I don't know why. This was the position in 93. But what happened? Now we have figures from 1991 to 2011. Now even 2013-14 figures we have. But I am taking a period of 20 years. In this 20-year period, the family savings went up from 19% to 28%. The national savings went up from 23% to 37%. The national investment went up from 24% to 40%. That is so we could reach a growth rate of 9.5%, 9.8%. How it happened? And the government of India began implementing what Jagdish Bhagavati wanted. They began cutting down the interest rates so that people will spend more. They began cutting down the tariffs so that the foreign goods will be available here. They allowed multinational companies to come here so that they can offer quality goods to the Indian people. And the media was happy. I am associated with media. Huge advertisements. Now there is no newspaper. Everybody delivers a book full of advertisement. You have to search for where the news is. So the media was happy. They were promoting this. Advertisement songs, everything, but our Indian women sang the advertisement songs, but they did not buy the goods. That is why the savings went up. I am going to tell you something which is available in the... Not many people read this, even the people who draft it don't read it. This is the Economic Survey of India, 2007-2008. You know, in this period from 1980 till 2008, 2007, they had tabulated the per capita income, per capita consumption and per capita savings. The most important part is first 12 years is the socialist economy, where the government was trying to curb consumption and promote savings. And the next 21 years, next 11 plus 5, 16 years, is the liberalized economy where the government was trying to promote consumption and reduce savings. Two divergent approaches. Socialist economy was trying to cut the consumption and promote savings, and the liberalized globalized economy doing the reverse, cut the savings and promote consumption. Precisely what Dr. Jagdish Bhagavati advised the government of India to do. Now I am going to read out the figures as to how the Indian society behaved. Per capita income and consumption between 1980 and 2008. Between 1980 to 86, the per capita income grew by 3.4% and the per capita consumption grew only by 3%. The per capita consumption growth was always less than the per capita income. This is socialist period. Naturally, the government was promoting savings and it was trying to curb consumption. They were taxing goods which are costly so people may not buy. In the next period, the growth in the per capita income between 1986 and 1992 was 6.2%. The consumption grew only by 4.3%. Understandable, because the government was trying to curb consumption. Now come to the next period. This is the period, the 6.2% income and 4.3% consumption is the first phase of first 11 years of liberalization. Liberalization has come. The government was cutting down the interest rate to make savings not economical. It is better to spend than to save. In this period, the per capita income goes up to 6.2%, but the consumption goes only by 4.3%. That means savings is more. And then in 2002-2003, income goes up by 2.2%, consumption by 1.1%. liberalization period. Dr. Jagdish Bhagawati's advice in operation. Interest rates have been cut. 3-year deposit carried 13% interest in 1992. But in 2002, it is cut down to 8%. In 2003-04, income goes up by 6.8%, expenditure goes up only by 4.2%. Entirely, year after year, income rise is more than the spending rise, completely demolishing the theory that when people get more income, they spend more. This is the experience of the United States of America, partly England, partly Australia, partly New Zealand, partly Canada. These are all called Anglo-Saxon societies. The entire economic theory which is being experimented on us has been generated in the laboratories of the Anglo-Saxon countries. This doesn't work in Japan, this doesn't work in Germany, this doesn't work in France, this certainly doesn't work in Italy. This doesn't work in Spain, doesn't work in Ireland. So they began cutting down the interest rates in the year 2004. The interest rate on 3-year bank deposit, 3 to 5-year bank deposit, which was 13% in 1992, had come down to 5.5%. But even then the people were saving more. This is totally against the principles of modern economics. It's not only India which behaves this way. In America, economics worked perfectly. In the year 1980, the bank deposits in America carried 23% interest. 23%. At that time, the American savings rate was 24% of the GDP, family savings. In 2001, the interest rate was cut to 0. And the family savings, which was 80% of the national savings, became 20% minus. People were borrowing and spending beyond their current income because credit cards have been introduced by that time.